It's the 1980s, or maybe the early 1990s, and you're sat on the floofy carpet of your parents' living room floor with a Pyrex bowl of neon cheese puffs in your lap. This is a time before nutrition. You are bathed in the blue glow of an analog TV. The house is quiet, except for the static hum between channels or the occasional floorboard creaking upstairs. These are the moments that you look forward to. The excitement of a comfortably unsettling kinship you feel. They graced horror hosting slots, cult films, the kind your parents may have warned you about or silently enjoyed themselves. My parents loved Elvira, Vampira, deadpan, statuesque, the original midnight seductress. She was way ahead of her time and corseted in a way that seemed to defy human anatomy. To this day. Then we had Elvira, campy, clever, and clad in her graveyard finest. She was loud, and she made horror fun, somehow less scary. Morticia Addams, regal, mysterious, deeply romantic, a bit insane. Lydia Dietz, whispering, "I myself am strange and unusual." It gave a whole generation of misfits a phrase that they can call their own. And then, of course, we have Nancy from The Craft. Feral, furious, unhinged. This was a girl that seemed a bit too real. I mean, we all know a Scorpio. These women weren't influencers. They weren't trying to sell you anything. They were iconic. They were unapologetically strange. And in that strangeness, many of us saw ourselves. Many of us found ourselves. Back then, if you didn't fit in, sometimes you looked there. Tales from the Crypt. I loved that show. These weren't just characters. They kind of gave direction, if not intentionally. They said, you can be weird. You can be dark. You can be yourself. For many of us, especially those of us growing up pre-internet, these characters were our first introduction to a dark aesthetic, dark beauty, the alternative to the blonde, sun-kissed girl in frosted lipstick and her Hampton Bays color palette. It took us from that to Gothic, the sort of alluring power of the other. And for some of us, many of us, it didn't stop there. That curiosity, it led us deeper, beyond the screen, into the music, into the community, into goth. Not everyone who loved Morticia Addams became a goth. Not everyone that bought a set of rosary beads after The Craft started listening to Susie and the Banshees. And that's okay. Because admiring an archetype is not the same as stepping into a subculture. Their presence may have held open the door, but it didn't define the space. And that's where we see a common confusion today. Those who don't know the difference and don't care to look deeper. Some people believe that loving Morticia Addams, dressing in black, or even quoting Lydia Dietz somehow makes you goth. It doesn't. A little harmless experimentation in fashion, identity searching, stepping outside that little box that you're used to, kind of exploring outside. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a safety in that, and that's kind of how we explore and grow. And it shouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be an issue if some people then didn't graduate to putting themselves on a platform and attempt to rewrite an entire subculture while centering themselves in it. Admiring a character is admiration. Liking a look, that's fashion. That alone, it doesn't make it subcultural. People have interests. These characters, they're all inspirational, but they're not foundational. They sparked curiosity, yes, that is for sure, but they're not the heartbeat of the subculture. That heartbeat, it came from the music. It came from the community. It came from digging our heels in every single time somebody tried to bully it out of us. These characters on screen, they might have lit that fire within you that got you started on that path, but the music is what keeps it burning. It's what ties it all together. And yet today we see people skipping the substance and just kind of clinging to the surface. And then that's when everybody mistakes costume for culture. And then when they're told otherwise, they're crying, elitist, gatekeeper. But a locked door isn't gatekeeping when there is a key. And that key was, is, and will always be music. This is a thought that's led many people within the subculture to the concern that the show Wednesday will somehow lead to another attack on the goth subculture. Okay, back to the 80s, back to the early 90s. For some people, that journey ended with that analog TV. Maybe a few VHS tapes, maybe got a couple posters on your wall, or the obligatory Halloween costume with your favorite icon. But for others, something clicked. That flicker of recognition, that resonance with the dark characters and the atmosphere. That gothic atmosphere, it wasn't just aesthetic, it evoked something. It was magnetic, and somehow within it, people saw themselves. That's where these journeys begin. More than the clothes, more than the characters, they wanted to know where this feeling came from. And if you were lucky, someone handed you a mixtape. And then you found yourself down at the local music stores, asking questions, listening in, looking at records, anything familiar, anything that bared that familiar kind of morbid, macabre visual that you could connect to what you were relating to on the screen. You read through the music magazines at the front of the store, and that is where it all began. At some point, you heard that first note. Maybe it was Bela Lugosi's Dead, or maybe it was the cold synths of the Frozen Autumn. But there it was, wrapping you in a world that you never knew existed, but somehow knew that it belonged to you. You didn't just wear black, you heard it. From the screen and then into your soul, it didn't feel like a trend, it didn't feel like a costume, it was more like a frequency that you tuned into. And if you got it, you got it. No amount of TikToks or Pinterest boards could teach something like that. You started showing up at clubs, you started showing up at events, at record stores, you were reading the magazines. You made pen pals across cities. You met others just like you, and you somehow all found each other by instinct. The music wasn't just background noise. It was the soundtrack to mounting memories. But importantly, it was the foundation. It shaped the dancing, the fashion, the language. And this is what many people forget today, or they didn't know in the first place. That goth wasn't born of a Netflix series. The history runs deep. It was born in the music, late nights, introspection, DIY, smoke and reverb, and the sweat of the underground clubs, and the nearly worn out cassette tapes. The things we did to repair those things. We know all too well what happens when people want that label and try to pry out the roots. And because of that, that's why we defend it. And it's not out of gatekeeping, it's out of guardianship. We've seen the subculture turned into a hollow costume one too many times. When a show like Wednesday appears, stylized, spooky, beautifully dark, it's natural that some goths, even though they thoroughly enjoy it, get a little bit twitchy. If you're a goth and you exist in some form on the internet, you know all too well how this can go. Will this be another wave of trend chasing? Another generation calling themselves goth while acting a fool after watching a series, but never listening to the music? Cue the onslaught of dudes with unwashed asses that find their way into the inbox of actual goth girls with the inspired idea of bedding one of us. Original. In many, many ways, those fears are not unfounded, as you probably surmised. We've been down this path before. When Wednesday first started, first season, there was that now infamous dance scene, choreographed in a really quirky way by Jenna Ortega, which was a really fun dance. The original scene featured the song Goo Goo Muck by the Cramps, but they played the song in its entirety. So the Cramps are a band that is very much tied to goth-adjacent history. They're kind of goth psychobilly, but they're very much related to the subculture. So a very obvious effort was made by the show's production. They could have picked anything. So it was a great way for them to kind of add a little bit of dark authenticity. But trendsetters happen, and TikTok did what TikTok does. Millions could not wait to get out there and mimic that scene, only they ripped the audio out and replaced it with Lady Gaga. Goo Goo Muck, gone. And suddenly, what was originally a moment of underground homage just became a viral pop dance. And that's the risk you take with exposure without context. It becomes detached and ultimately commodified. In season 2, Episode 1, a very deliberate choice was made. He used No Time to Cry by Sisters of Mercy. This was not a clip. This was not a background hum. He played the whole damn song. Do you know how long Sisters of Mercy songs are? This didn't seem like just a soundtrack choice. It seemed like a gesture of respect. It was like a statement. A little bit of a quiet nod to all the goths in the room, with a little bonus nod for the ones in the back. It wasn't about gatekeeping. It was educating. And education is where the majority of gatekeeping accusations go to die. Perhaps those involved in the show thought, okay, if they want to make comparisons, let's show them what it sounds like outside the gates of Nevermore. Cue the music. And in doing so, Wednesday stopped being just another spooky show, and it started becoming, at least in part, a little bit of a cultural bridge. Whether or not the audience crosses it, that's up to them. So when I see people voice their fears about the show Wednesday, and I've gotten so many comments from people on varying platforms of them expressing their fears, I don't see a threat. I see potential. The kind of potential that we had back in the day when discovery was slower. It was a bit more personal, like finding a tiny used record store down like some random side street that you didn't even know was there. The only difference now is that tiny little record store now has Wi-Fi, and there's a bunch of exit signs with arrows pointing in all different directions, and a bunch of influencers just yelling at the walls. The problem isn't Wednesday or anyone involved in the show. The problem is what comes after that. It's the TikTokers. It's all of the trend hoppers who mimic the look and skip the sound. They want to extract all of that context and cultural nuance. Try and jump on a bandwagon, and use said bandwagon to force their way through the subcultural gates and wreck the joint. Deliberately removing the goth music from the scenes and then replacing it with chart-topping hits, as if the original soundtrack were some sort of mistake that required fixing. And in doing so, they kind of go on and prove the point that it's not about appreciation. It was never about appreciation. It's about dissolving goth into something that's just palatable and unrooted. Wednesday was never trying to be goth. It was trying to be morbid, quirky, and stylish. Just like Vampira, just like Elvira, just like the Addams Family, or Beetlejuice that came before it. But today, people don't just watch a show, they see a brand opportunity. And the moment they see black clothing, a pale face, or like a deadpan stare, immediately they slap the label goth onto it, no matter the context. And music, what's that? If Wednesday is trending, then goth must be trending too. And suddenly, everybody wants peace. But Wednesday itself isn't the problem. The problem is the people who confuse dark with goth, and many who don't seem to care even if you try to explain it to them. Back then, finding goth was like stumbling onto a secret. There was no algorithm out there to show you what you might also like. There was no For You page or what kind of goth are you quiz. You either had someone older show you the ropes, or you pieced it together on your own. And all of it, it took time, it took effort. You didn't just find goth. In a lot of ways, you earned it, and you felt this sense of accomplishment and appreciation because of how fucking hard it was. You went digging. You are sat on dirty floors with crates of old magazines and records. You didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm goth now. You kind of became one gradually. By immersion, by connection, by sound. And the aesthetic for a lot of people, it came after the music. Some people jumped in head first, but for many, the aesthetic kind of became after the discovery because it was something that was organic. And that aesthetic was an echo of all of the sounds that you loved. Now, it's no secret that it's very different. The subculture seems to be split between sort of two realities, the real life reality of what goth is, the truth of it, and then what exists virtually online. And in the virtual sort of space, it's very different from that reality. It's like a few clicks, a swipe here, you see a look, you mimic it, you post it, and suddenly you're goth. No music, no bands, no understanding of where it came from, just a look repeated endlessly by people that never went deeper. It seems to praise and honor aesthetic without context because to them, the reality is really boring unless it's like super sensationalized in some way. The reality of goth, the truth of it, it doesn't get the clicks. They find it very boring unless you sensationalize it somehow, and this is where many goths begin to feel uneasy. Not because we're being bitter, not because we're being elitist. It's because we watch something that we held sacred become stripped of its meaning, turned into content, and then handed back to us, sexualized and misunderstood. And then we are getting dragged in that backlash. When goth trends, it reflects on us. When the entire aesthetic becomes sexualized, we're the ones that get objectified. And this isn't evolution, it's consequences. And you can't help but feel like a little bit jaded when the subculture that you've poured yourself into is now a TikTok trend led by people who think that a Cure lyric is some sad Instagram quote. Or when goth playlists include like Billie Eilish or Lil Peep and whatever moody pop is trending that week. And it's not about hating new music. There's tons of new goth music coming out every day. It's not about being stuck in the past. It's about keeping the term goth tied to the very thing that created it, the music. And the difference isn't just generational, it's more cultural. I mean, believe me, we have people of all ages trying to strong arm their way into a subculture with all the culture of a pack of Slim Jims and an ankle monitor. In the past, goth was discovered through curiosity, but now it's kind of adopted through consumption in all of its forms. In the past, it was kind of a language that you learned over time. And now it's a lot of people who want the label and want to kind of wear it without really knowing what it means. And to be fair, it's not entirely their fault. The platforms that we use today, they prioritize speed and spectacle. People have no fucking attention spans, and you have to grab their attention hard and fast because within 12 seconds you're going to lose them. But goth was never meant to be fast. It was never about going viral. It was about that slow burn. The late drives with music and your heartbeat just synced up with the bass line. But that's the risk now. Not that people are discovering goth through the internet. Tons of new goths found it that way. Many people were born into a generation where they didn't know life without social media, so it's kind of natural that this would be another mode for them to find it. But the risk is that they kind of get there and stop at the surface. The irony of the many cries of gatekeeper and elitist is that the doors to goth have never been more open. Everything is at your fingertips now. Every band, every interview, every gig, past and present, there are archived magazines, but people skip it. They choose not to look. They don't want to walk through the door. They either want to stand on the roof and pose or just vandalize the place. So do I believe that the show Wednesday is a threat to the goth subculture? No. Because the truth is, many of us, we didn't stumble into goth by accident. We were sparked by something. Maybe it was the sound of a particular song. Maybe it was the first time you saw a group of goths in public, and they suddenly made you feel seen in a way that you had never even seen yourself until that very moment. If it was the 80s, maybe you got there from punk. Maybe you got there from watching Elvira. Whatever the path, it took effort because you had to walk it in all of its bumpy, windy charm. Before the internet just kind of held everything at your fingertips, discovery was slow and it was intentional. And everyone's experience, all of us, is very deeply personal. You were out there, you were following flyers on telephone poles. You hung out in record stores. You copied handwritten band names into notebooks and you hunted them down one by one, no matter how long it took. For you, the culture unfolded like a map that you had to draw yourself. Today, people still find goth, but oftentimes it's through the internet, which does reward speed over substance. Access now means excess. Too much information, too fast, with no way to tell what's real unless you really know where to look. And that's when the OGs and the elders come in and we try to help you dispel and mitigate all of the excess. No good deed goes unpunished. In this climate, sensationalism rises while truth sinks. Aesthetic replaces meaning in a land of visual cues. And this is where Wednesday walks in. It is a spin-off of the Addams Family, which is a morbid, beloved pop culture property that's been a well-loved goth-adjacent sort of comfort, but not part of it. The media loves to paint shit with a broad brush. Black clothing, dark themes, definitely goth. The problem isn't the show. The show is great. The show has potential to attract, much in the way that we did long, long ago. But you put a tray of cinnamon buns out on a picnic table and the people will come, but so will the swarms of bugs. So back to the fears of everyone that are concerned about the show Wednesday affecting the subculture. When goth becomes a trend, it also becomes a target. And when goth becomes a target, it comes around to our front door, not theirs. That's the danger. Not Wednesday, but the shallow temperament of those who want to harvest goth's look without having any semblance of respect or connection to the meaning. But people are going to find a way to do that with pretty much anything. There was a week where Kim and Kourtney Kardashian just wore black, and the media went absolutely insane saying, goth is back. Where the fuck did it go in the first place? Do not underestimate the amount of mental gymnastics people will do to tick off another hashtag on their personal identity card. But honestly, in this case, I think Wednesday did something right. At least from my perspective, it seems that the show's creators and those involved in production understands how much subcultures and cultures can be co-opted. They understood the viral mimicry machine that is TikTok. Instead of leaning into aesthetic alone, they made a choice. And that choice was to include actual goth music. In season 1, we had Google Muck by the Cramps, and then season 2, we had No Time to Cry by Sisters of Mercy. Real, raw, untouched, and unrepentantly goth, and it's not accidental. And who knows, maybe it's an attempt to confront the trend chasers with the real sound of the subculture that they're about to imitate in the hopes that they'll hear it, and with some people, it might just resonate. The show isn't out there trying to hijack the subculture. If anything, it's sort of subtly dropping breadcrumbs. The real threat is a swarm of virtual tourists that want the aesthetic, they want the label, and they go out there and make absolute asses of themselves. And then everyone out here thinks that that is what goth actually is. But those people, they're not here to understand. They're here to be seen. And goth has really always been about seeing right through that. If goth is anything, it is resilient. It has weathered every wave of mislabeling, every subcultural parasite, every single moment that it was dragged into the spotlight and then misunderstood. But it never goes anywhere. It's still here. Goth doesn't die when something goes mainstream, becomes a pain in the ass, but it survives when we all get involved and we protect the heart of it by sharing the history, holding the line, and playing the music louder than all that static. Wednesday is not the end of goth. It actually might be someone's beginning. And if that beginning includes Sisters of Mercy in someone's headphones, then maybe they're headed in the right direction.